name is Julius Fleming Jr. I'm an assistant professor of English at the University of Maryland, College Park, where I also direct the English honors program. My first book, entitled Black Patients, Performance, Civil Rights, and the Unfinished Project of Emancipation, is a book that is essentially about the relationship between theater and the modern civil rights movement, or reconsider the civil rights movement from the perspective of Black theater. When I started to do research for the book, I was interested more broadly in the relationship between literature and the civil rights movement. So I was studying poetry, I was studying novels. What I realized after going to the archive and turning to Jet Magazine, Ebony Magazine, Black World, Negro Digest, and the papers of various writers and Black artists, is that theater was crucial to the movement, even as it's a cultural form that we don't often turn to think about the cultural front of the civil rights movement. And so I was really interested in that relationship between theater and the civil rights movement. And as I started to study this archive, I began to notice increasingly that Black people were using theater to resist what I call in the book the violent cultures of Black patients, or this kind of long history of Black people increasingly and constantly being forced to wait for freedom. And the civil rights movement was a moment where Black people used strategies like Black theater to refuse this call for Black patients. At the outset, and focusing on theater, the book allows us to think about the civil rights movement from a different vantage point. Conventionally, we like to prioritize television and photography when thinking about the movement. And so we all are familiar with images of dogs biting civil rights activists, the sheriffs in the US South who were acting violently toward civil rights protesters and those sorts of things. But theater unlocks another way of not only seeing the movement, but also of knowing the movement, both culturally and politically. So it provides a different archival site from which we can gain knowledge about the movement. And so throughout the book, for example, I tend to focus on the importance of time, right? When thinking about Black patients is all about the relationship between race and time and Blackness and time. We started to see that Black people weren't only using the lunch counter to demand freedom now, they weren't only using the street to stage a march to demand freedom now, or using the pulpit at a church rally, they were also using the theatrical stage, right? To forward this radical political idea of Black people wanting their freedom now. So that's one way that we get to kind of see the movement differently, right, by turning to the theatrical stage. But also, one of the things that civil rights scholars have been interested in is how do we uncover a more radical civil rights movement? And the answer for many of these scholars is to turn to an earlier moment of political radicalism, particularly communism and leftist activism of the 1930s, 40s, and early 50s. And a part of what this book shows is that we don't need to go back to those earlier moments or a long history of civil rights activism to unlock the movement's radical dimensions, right? The refusal of Black patients is a radical act, for example. Also in the book, I look at the importance of queer sexual desires, right? We talk so much about bodies during the civil rights movement. We talk so much about political desire during the civil rights movement. But one thing that theater uncovers is that queer desires, queer sexual desires were also vital to this movement. So these are the sorts of moves that I make in the book through theater to unlock new ways of knowing the civil rights movement, new ways of experiencing and seeing the civil rights movement. One thing in focusing on Black patients, so I situate the book within a sort of narrow framework of the modern civil rights movement, or what some scholars have called the short civil rights movement, sort of from Brown v. Board of Education in '54 to the late 1960s, right, with the death of Martin Luther King and the quote unquote rise of Black power and those sorts of things. But in theorizing Black patients, a part of what I want to point out is that from the slave castle to the belly of the slave ship to the auction block to the civil rights movement, when President John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy and William Faulkner are politely axing or impolitely axing and demanding that Black people wait for freedom. This racial project that I'm calling Black patients has a centuries-long history, right? And if we link it to the contemporary moment, a part of what we come to understand is that even as there were these ideas of a post-racial society circulating with the election of Barack Obama, very soon after we were sort of entrenched and mired in one of the most challenging moments in the racial history of this country. A part of what was happening, for example, is that at the same time that we were celebrating someone like John Lewis and his contributions to the civil rights movement. In the wake of his death, right now we have a bill in Congress, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act bill, that is stalled, that is not passing, that would secure the voting rights for Black people in particular, for oppressed and marginalized people. So in terms of its contemporary relevance, we see that the project of Black patience is continuing. It has afterlives, right, that continue to impact and shape our contemporary moment. We can think about things like gerrymandering, right? We can think about, for example, the disproportionate wait times that Black people experience in hospital emergency rooms that often lead to premature death. So this idea, this structure of this structural relationship between Blackness and waiting continues to be with us and continues to structure society. At the same time, we also have innovative artists, right, just like we did during the civil rights movement, who are using theater to resist the violent cultures of Black patients. One example that I'll give is that in the wake of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, there was a performance of Waiting for Godot staged in New Orleans as a way to critique the days that Black people had to wait for the federal government to intervene and provide assistance in the wake of a natural disaster. So the violent project continues to be with us, but also the creative use of theater as a resistance to the cultures of Black patients is as important in our contemporary moment.